The briefing room was already warm when the lieutenant commander took his seat. Not physically, professionally. The kind of warmth that came from confidence pooling at the top of the table and draining away from everyone else. Rows of officers filled the tiered seats, uniforms crisp, expressions settled. This was Fleet Command territory. Admirals spoke, others listened. He sat 2 rows back, centered, posture straight, hands folded loosely in front of him. His rank placed him low enough to be invisible and high enough to be useful. The worst place to be when egos were involved. At the head of the room, the Admiral finished speaking. A pause followed, not silence. Anticipation. The lieutenant commander cleared his throat once, not loudly, just enough. "I have a concern regarding the contingency assumptions," he said evenly. "Specifically the asset coverage in the Eastern Corridor." The Admiral turned slowly as if locating the source of an unexpected sound. He smiled. That smile spread into a laugh. Not sharp, not cruel, worse, casual. A few others joined in softly at first. Polite laughter, the kind meant to align with power. The Admiral leaned back in his chair. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, drawing out the words. "You're an intelligence liaison, correct?" "Yes, sir." "Then I suggest you leave fleet maneuvering to those of us who command fleets." More laughter, louder now. The lieutenant commander didn't move, didn't flush, didn't look down. He had learned years ago that reaction was what arrogance fed on. The Admiral waved a hand dismissively. "We'll proceed as briefed." The room settled. Pens moved again, screens shifted, then a sound cut through it all. A phone. Not a personal device, not a muted vibration. A secure line rang from the center console. Once. Twice. The Admiral frowned. "Who authorized?" An aide stepped forward, pale. "Sir, it's the White House." The laughter didn't stop immediately. It died mid-breath. The Admiral hesitated, then pressed the speaker. "This is Admiral." The voice that answered didn't wait. "Put the lieutenant commander on the line." The room froze. Every head turned. The Admiral looked down the table, confusion giving way to irritation. "Which lieutenant commander?" The voice repeated, firmer now. "The one seated 2 rows back. Center." The lieutenant commander stood. Smoothly, calmly. He walked forward as the room parted without anyone realizing they had moved. He took the phone. "This is he," he said. "Good," the president replied. "I'm glad you're where you are." Not a whisper followed. Not a breath. "Yes, sir," the lieutenant commander said. "We'll discuss the contingency shift shortly. For now, stay put." "Yes, sir." The line went dead. The lieutenant commander handed the phone back and returned to his seat. He did not look at the Admiral. "Before I tell you what happened next, subscribe the channel and let me know in the comments where are you watching from. It helps more than you know. The meeting resumed, badly. The Admiral attempted to regain control, but something fundamental had changed. Authority, once cracked, never returned the same way. Every sentence he spoke now carried a second layer of scrutiny. The lieutenant commander said nothing. He listened. He always listened, because this hadn't started today. Years earlier, when he had been younger and quieter and far less visible, someone had noticed how he operated, how he connected fragments others dismissed, how he understood patterns not as predictions but as warnings. He had been selected quietly. No ceremony, no acknowledgement, just a folder slid across a table and a sentence he never forgot. "If something goes wrong, you'll already be where we need you." Since then, he had done 2 jobs at once, the one on his uniform, and the one no one else in that room knew existed. The Admiral spoke again, sharper now, trying to reassert dominance. "We'll revisit the Eastern Corridor after lunch." The lieutenant commander finally raised his hand. The room stiffened. "Yes," the Admiral snapped. "With respect, sir," he said calmly. "That won't be soon enough." The Admiral opened his mouth and stopped, because an aide was already moving toward him. Another note, another whisper. This time, the Admiral's face didn't just tighten. It drained. The lieutenant commander remained seated, composed, unreadable. He had not wanted this to happen in public, but contingency scenarios rarely cared about pride. And the room that had laughed at his rank was about to learn that rank was never the measure that mattered most. By the end of that day, the Admiral would understand why the president had spoken his name, and why the briefing room would never sound the same again. The room never recovered its rhythm. Words were spoken, slides advanced, but the cadence was gone. Every officer present knew it. Authority had shifted, not in rank but in relevance, and no one was willing to say it out loud. The Admiral tried anyway. He stood straighter, voice clipped, returning to the presentation as if nothing had happened. Fleet movements, readiness metrics, carrier group posture. All of it sounded practiced, confident, too confident. The lieutenant commander sat still, eyes forward, listening with the same discipline he always had. But now he was listening for something else. The gaps. He noticed the Admiral avoided certain phrases, avoided a specific map layer, avoided one corridor entirely. That alone told him the call hadn't been coincidence. When the meeting finally adjourned, chairs scraped softly across the deck. Conversations didn't spark the way they usually did. Officers filed out in small clusters, glancing back toward the front of the room as if expecting another interruption. None came. The Admiral remained behind. "So," he said sharply once the room had thinned, "care to explain?" The lieutenant commander turned to face him. "There's nothing to explain, sir." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "You embarrassed me. I followed protocol. You went over my head. I didn't initiate the call." That landed harder than any accusation. The Admiral stared at him for a long moment, then gestured toward the door. "Walk with me." They moved into the corridor outside the briefing room. The sound of the ship surrounded them now. Distant machinery, footsteps, the low hum of power moving through steel. "You're an intelligence liaison," the Admiral said. "That role exists to advise, not to override command." "Yes, sir." "Then why does the President know your name?" The lieutenant commander didn't answer immediately. "Because the truth wasn't classified. It was inconvenient. I was selected several years ago," he said calmly, "for contingency scenarios that require direct reporting." The Admiral scoffed. "That's vague." "It was meant to be." They stopped near a viewport. Ocean stretched endlessly beyond it. "You're telling me," the Admiral said slowly, "that while I've been commanding fleets, you've been operating some invisible line to the White House?" "I'm telling you," the lieutenant commander replied, "that when certain conditions align, I'm required to bypass standard channels." The Admiral laughed again, but this time it was brittle. "Defensive, contingency scenarios," he repeated. "You expect me to believe that?" The lieutenant commander met his gaze. "You don't need to believe it," he said. "You'll see the effects." Silence followed. The Admiral turned away first. That afternoon a directive arrived. Not addressed to Fleet Command, not copied widely. It was routed through secure channels that only a handful of people aboard the carrier could access. The lieutenant commander was one of them. He read it once, then again. The contingency had escalated. Assets he had been quietly managing, relationships, back channels, listening posts that existed more in trust than in hardware, were now relevant. The Admiral hadn't known about them. That hadn't been an oversight. It had been deliberate. In a secure workspace tucked away from the main operations floor, the lieutenant commander made 2 calls, both brief, both acknowledged without question. He logged responses, adjusted timelines, updated one encrypted note that had not been touched in months. Above him, the ship carried on. Dinner was served. Watches rotated. The illusion of routine held, but below the surface, decisions were being made without ceremony. That evening, the Admiral received a second call. This one was not on speaker. No laughter followed. The lieutenant commander didn't see him again that night. He returned to his quarters instead and sat at the narrow desk, reviewing old notes. Not reports, patterns. Things that had felt slightly wrong at the time but hadn't justified disruption. Now they aligned. The call from the White House hadn't been about him. It had been about timing. Somewhere far from the carrier, a situation had crossed a threshold. One that required someone already embedded, already underestimated, already trusted not to seek recognition. The lieutenant commander closed the file. Tomorrow the Admiral would learn what contingency really meant, and whether command authority could survive being the last to know. By morning, the Admiral would discover that the lieutenant commander hadn't challenged his authority. He had quietly outpaced it. Morning came without ceremony. The carrier moved through calm water, flight operations beginning as scheduled. From the outside, nothing suggested instability. From the inside, the ship felt different, like a structure holding its breath. The lieutenant commander was already awake. He stood at the small desk in his quarters reviewing a set of encrypted updates that had come in overnight. No headers, no signatures, just confirmations, acknowledgments, assets active, channels secure, everything he needed. He dressed slowly, deliberately. Uniform pressed, insignia correct. Nothing to suggest the weight he carried. He had learned early that visibility was a liability. When he stepped onto the operations deck, conversations dipped, not stopped, just softened. People noticed him now, not because of rank, but because of association. That was new. The Admiral arrived moments later, flanked by aides. His expression was controlled, but the confidence from the previous day hadn't returned. He took his position at the center console, eyes scanning the room as if recalibrating the hierarchy. "Brief me," he said. An officer stepped forward, cleared his throat. "Sir, we've received updated intelligence regarding the Eastern Corridor." The lieutenant commander listened. The phrasing had changed. What had once been labeled low probability was now emerging concern. What had been unverified chatter was now corroborated signals. It was subtle but unmistakable. The Admiral noticed it too. "And why?" he asked sharply. "Is this the first I'm hearing of this escalation?" No one answered immediately. The lieutenant commander didn't speak. He waited. The briefer continued, voice careful. "These developments align with previously identified contingency markers." The Admiral's gaze snapped toward the lieutenant commander. "Your markers?" The lieutenant commander met his eyes calmly. "They're not mine, sir." "Then whose?" "The ones I was instructed to monitor." The room tightened. The Admiral folded his arms. "You're telling me that while my command staff assessed this as background noise, you were tracking it as a trigger?" "Yes, sir." "And you didn't think to raise that?" "I did," the lieutenant commander replied. "Yesterday." Silence followed. The Admiral's jaw worked. "You raised a concern. You didn't say the President would be calling my briefing room. That wasn't my decision." The Admiral turned away, clearly restraining something sharper. "So what happens now?" The lieutenant commander glanced at the screen. "Now, the contingency activates." As if on cue, new data populated the display. Movements, communications, shifts in posture that meant nothing to the untrained eye, and everything to someone who had spent years watching for alignment rather than action. An aide leaned in to whisper to the Admiral. Whatever was said drained the last of his color. "This is verified?" the Admiral asked. "Yes, sir." "Fully?" "Yes." The Admiral exhaled slowly, then straightened. "Very well, Lieutenant Commander." The room stilled. "You will brief me," he said. "Now." The Lieutenant Commander stepped forward. He spoke without slides, without theatrics. He outlined the network as it existed, not as it was assumed to be. He explained why certain movements mattered only in combination, why delay was not indecision but intent. No one interrupted. When he finished, the room remained silent, not in confusion but in recalibration. The Admiral nodded once. "I see." It wasn't an apology, but it wasn't dismissal either. Orders followed, adjustments made, assets repositioned, all of it framed as routine. It wasn't. As the room dispersed, the Admiral lingered behind again. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "I tried," the Lieutenant Commander replied. "You laughed." The Admiral didn't respond. That afternoon, a second directive arrived from the White House. This one unmistakable. Clear lines, clear authority. The Lieutenant Commander was formally assigned to oversee the contingency response. The Admiral's name was listed. Below it, in smaller type, was a change in command structure that no one missed. The Admiral read it in his office, alone. The Lieutenant Commander learned of it indirectly, through a confirmation ping on his secure device. No satisfaction followed, just momentum. Because the contingency had never been about who laughed. It had always been about who listened early enough to act. And by the time the Admiral understood that distinction, the window for pride had already closed. The Admiral thought the call had been a warning, but it was only the first sign that command was about to move around him, not with him. The change did not announce itself. No bells, no public statement, no dramatic handover on the deck. It arrived the way real shifts always did, quietly, in routing paths and access permissions, in who was copied and who was not. The Lieutenant Commander felt it before he saw it. He walked into the operations space and noticed conversations stopping a half-second earlier than before. Screens that once defaulted to fleet posture now carried layered intelligence feeds. Questions, when asked, were directed toward him without anyone consciously deciding to do so. Authority was rearranging itself. The Admiral sensed it too. He stood at the center console longer than necessary, scanning displays he had once commanded without challenge. He issued instructions that were acknowledged but no longer anticipated. The subtle momentum that had always preceded his words was gone. He was still in charge, but he was no longer central. Midday, a secure briefing was called, smaller this time, tighter. The kind of meeting that existed because someone had decided visibility was now a risk. The lieutenant commander was invited, the admiral was informed. That distinction mattered. Inside the room, the lieutenant commander laid out the next phase, not as a warning, as a necessity. "The window is narrowing," he said evenly. "If the pattern holds, delay becomes exposure." An intelligence officer nodded. "We're seeing confirmation across independent channels." A strategist frowned. "Then why hasn't this surfaced through standard fleet assessments?" The lieutenant commander answered without hesitation. "Because standard assessments look for escalation. This avoids it." The admiral folded his arms. "You're asking me to reposition assets based on inference." "I'm asking you," the lieutenant commander replied, "to trust the contingency you were briefed on this morning." Silence followed. Not hostile, not dismissive, evaluative. The admiral studied him for a long moment, then exhaled slowly. "Proceed," he said. The word carried weight, but it landed differently now. Orders went out. Subtle ones, course adjustments, patrol reallocations. Communication protocols tightened under the justification of routine drills. To an outsider, nothing had changed. To anyone watching closely, everything had. Late that afternoon, another message arrived from the White House. This one did not request input. It delivered confirmation. The lieutenant commander read it once and closed the file. The contingency had been correct. The network they had been tracking was not preparing to strike. It was preparing to disappear, which meant someone somewhere had realized they were being watched. "Admiral," the lieutenant commander said quietly, approaching the console. "We're approaching the pivot point." The admiral looked up. "Define pivot." "The moment where reacting becomes chasing," he said. "And chasing means we're late." The admiral nodded once. "Then we move now." That sentence, "we move now," was the closest thing to acknowledgement the lieutenant commander would ever receive. By evening, the carrier's posture had shifted, quietly, intentionally, supporting assets aligned into positions that made no sense unless someone understood what was being denied rather than attacked. The admiral stood on the bridge as night settled in, watching the dark water roll past. "You know," he said without turning, "I used to think command was about being right." The lieutenant commander stood beside him, eyes forward. "It's about being early." The admiral didn't smile, but he didn't laugh either. When the final confirmation arrived, short, encrypted, absolute, the admiral closed his eyes briefly. "It's done," the lieutenant commander said. "Yes," the admiral replied. "And now comes the reckoning," because somewhere beyond the horizon consequences were unfolding. Careers, alliances, assumptions, none of them insulated from the truth that had surfaced. And by the time morning came, it would be clear to everyone aboard the ship that command had not failed because it lacked authority. It had failed because it had ignored the quietest voice in the room. The admiral still held the title, but the decisions shaping the outcome were no longer his to make. The reckoning did not arrive with force. It arrived with paperwork. By morning, the carrier was operating under a revised command framework that no one openly discussed. Messages were phrased carefully. Authority still flowed through the admiral's office, but it detoured more often now, routed through briefings he did not chair and decisions he did not finalize. The lieutenant commander noticed the change in small ways. Requests that once came indirectly now landed on his terminal with direct priority tags. Analysts asked him questions without checking rank first. Operations officers waited for his confirmation before locking timelines. None of it was announced. That made it permanent. The admiral felt it too. He sat through the morning brief without interrupting once. His questions were precise but fewer. His presence still commanded respect, but no longer deference. Midway through the session, an aide entered quietly and handed him a folder. The Admiral opened it, closed it, then stood. "Continue," he said flatly and walked out. The room remained silent for a beat after he left. Then it resumed, smoother than before. That was when everyone understood. An hour later, the lieutenant commander was summoned, not by the Admiral but by a secure line routed through Fleet Command and terminating in Washington. The voice on the other end did not waste words. "You were selected because you don't seek authority," the President said. "That hasn't changed." "No, sir. The Admiral's performance is under review." The lieutenant commander did not react. "Effective immediately," the President continued. "Operational authority for the contingency rests with you until relief arrives." "Yes, sir." The call ended. By the time the lieutenant commander returned to the operations deck, the Admiral was already there, standing alone at the console, staring at a screen that no longer responded to his access code. "You should have told me," the Admiral said quietly without turning. "I did," the lieutenant commander replied. "You laughed." The Admiral closed his eyes briefly. When he spoke again, the arrogance was gone. "I thought rank was insulation," he said. "I thought experience meant immunity." The lieutenant commander said nothing. That was enough. Later that afternoon, the relief order arrived. Clean, unambiguous, public. The Admiral was reassigned pending review. Another flag officer would assume command at the next port. The announcement was read aloud in the same briefing room where the laughter had started. No one laughed this time. The Admiral stood at attention as protocol demanded. His face revealed nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. As the room dispersed, officers avoided eye contact. Some out of respect, some out of relief, some out of fear. The lieutenant commander remained seated until the room emptied. That evening, as the sun sank into the ocean, the Admiral stopped beside him one last time. "You were right," he said. "And I was wrong." The lieutenant commander met his gaze calmly. "What matters is what happens next." The Admiral nodded once, then walked away. The carrier moved on. The contingency was resolved. The network neutralized. The crisis that never made headlines faded quietly into history. But the lesson remained, etched into the memory of everyone who had witnessed the shift. Authority could command a room, but awareness decided outcomes. The laughter had ended. The command had changed. And now the fleet would learn what happened when humility arrived too late. The new Admiral arrived without ceremony. No announcement echoed through the carrier. No speech was given on the deck. Authority changed hands the way it was meant to, quietly, efficiently, without spectacle. The lieutenant commander watched the transition from a distance. That had always been his place. Operations stabilized within hours. Revised protocols became standard procedure. The contingency that had once lived in the margins of classified folders was quietly folded into doctrine, stripped of the name, but not the lesson. The fleet moved on. In the days that followed, inquiries came from above. Reviews were conducted. Decisions were documented with language careful enough to protect institutions while still correcting course. The Admiral's removal was framed as routine, but no one aboard the ship believed that. They had been there. They had heard the laughter. They had heard the call. The lieutenant commander was asked to brief senior leadership once more before the carrier reached port. This time, the room felt different, not warmer, calmer. No one underestimated him now. He spoke briefly, answered questions directly, declined credit when it was offered. When asked what had made the difference, he gave the same response he always had. "I listened early," he said. That answer stayed with them. After the briefing, he returned to his quarters and sat alone for a moment, the hum of the ship steady around him. He allowed himself no satisfaction, no resentment, only acknowledgement. He had done the job he was selected to do. Years earlier, when he had been chosen quietly, he had been told something else as well, something never written down. If the day comes when authority laughs, remember that outcomes don't. That day had come and passed. When the carrier finally docked, the lieutenant commander disembarked like everyone else. No escort, no recognition, just another officer stepping onto solid ground. That suited him. Somewhere ahead, there would be another briefing room, another confident voice, Another moment when the quietest person in the room would matter most. He would be ready, because rank could fill a room, experience could dominate it, but judgment, clear, disciplined, and early, was the only thing that ever decided what followed. And if you've been listening this far, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is where you're watching from. It helps more than you know.